Welcome to Basic Brewing Radio for Thursday, February 2nd, 2012. It's Groundhog Day. I'm James Spencer. Here at Basic Brewing Radio, we're all about home brewing. With this week, home brewer Patrick Bresnahan shares his Bourbon Stout experiment. How much bourbon should you put into your beer for the proper balance? We'll taste what Patrick has found out so far. If you're new to home brewing and would like to get into the hobby, check out our website, basicbrewing.com, where you can find archives of our audio and video podcasts and our DVDs to walk you through basic and more advanced brewing techniques. And our new 2012 Brewer's Logbooks are in the house, going out the door. You can log 50 batches of beer, all the details. Got a calendar in the front there to help you track your fermentations and such. You can follow me on Twitter. My username is Basic Brewing, all one word. Also, you can find me on Facebook at facebook.com/basicbrewing.james. And our Facebook page, our show page, is at facebook.com/basicbrewing. Thanks again to everybody clicking on the Amazon.com associate link on our basicbrewing.com site. Whenever you think of Amazon, think of us and click on our associate link first. It won't cost you any extra, and you'll be helping us to bring you this show, and we appreciate your support. And there is now an amazon.co.uk link on there as well. We have associate links for Brew Your Own magazine and the American Homebrewers Association on our site, too. You can find our iPhone and Android podcast apps on their respective stores and the Android app. He's also on Amazon.com. We're on the BlackBerry podcast directory now, too. And we're on the Stitcher app as well. The form for the Brew Your Own magazine Basic Brewing Radio experiment on Trube is actually updated and online, like 3 weeks in advance. You can find it at basicbrewing.com/experiment. And if you'll remember, we're testing whether transferring Trube into the fermenter has an effect on your beer. It's getting fairly close to the February 20th deadline. But there is a second component to the experiment. If you haven't gotten started on it yet, it's the wort stability test. You've got plenty of time to do that still. It's simple. Just transfer a little of your wort from the kettle after chilling into a sanitized or better yet, sterilized container and see how long it takes before it starts fermenting on its own without the addition of any yeast. We'll just see how clean your wort really is. A new episode of Basic Brewing Video is out there. In this week's episode, Steve and I head over to new homebrewer Tim Hudson's house to help him get started in the hobby. We also test our efforts from a previous episode at stepping up a Mr. Beer kit. In the previous Basic Brewing Video show, we ditched the booster sugar pack that comes with the Mr. Beer ingredient kit, and we did a partial mash instead. And a lot of you were curious as to how that turned out. So check out the Basic Brewing Video episode this week to see. Registration is now open for the National Homebrewers Conference in Seattle, taking place in June. You can go to ahaconference.org to make your reservation and book your room and such. You might not want to delay. It's been selling out for the past few years, and rooms tend to go quickly. We're planning on being there. If you're going to be in Seattle and want to bring an experiment for us to sample and talk about, drop me a line and let's coordinate. We'd love to get together with homebrewers again like we did in San Diego last year. June will be here before you know it. Let's take a quick look into the mailbag. It's been a while since we did that. Let's do some basic questions this week. Sean from Pennsylvania asks, I just brewed my first homebrew, congratulations, and I had a question. I racked my beer from the primary, which is a bucket, into my secondary carboy. After cleaning out the yeast cake and the stuff on the sides, I noticed that the bucket still smells. I don't know if this is normal or not, so I figured I would ask before I put another batch inside. Well, when you say smells, I'm assuming that you don't mean stinks. If it smells like beer and you've washed the bucket well with a cloth, never anything abrasive, then I think you're okay. I normally get a faint beery smell in my fermentation buckets right after I empty and clean them. It's nothing to worry about. As long as you get it nice and clean, that smell is not gonna bother your next beer. Thomas writes in with this one, just transferred an Oktoberfest beer kit from my local homebrew supply store. I noticed that the beer level in the fermenter was at the 4-gallon mark. I thought the level when poured into the fermenter was 5 gallons. Did the yeast use up 1 gallon of wort during the fermentation activity? And have you had these things happen to you? Well, usually when it happens to me, is that I sample some homebrew and I kind of forget where I am and add the wrong amount of water, and I think it's the right amount, and later on I look and what happened? But no, the yeast wouldn't have used up a gallon of wort, turning it into beer in the process. You may be misremembering like me, or if you've transferred from a primary fermenter into a secondary fermenter, you'll lose some beer in the tube at the bottom there. However, I don't think that you'll lose a full gallon. Or if you have a bucket that's been pre-marked by the manufacturer, with the little gallon marks on the side, you may want to calibrate it to make sure that the marks are correct. If you think you've put 5 gallons in there and it only says 4, I've heard from some brewers who say they've checked it out. They've poured water into the bucket with a half-gallon or a gallon measuring bowl, for instance, that they trust, and they found the marks on the side telling you how many gallons you got in there. They found those to be off. So you may want to try that to make sure that what you're seeing on the side is actually correct. I do know, however, it's not thirsty yeast that are to blame for drinking your gallon of beer. They do sort of drink it, but then they give it right back to you. Preston in Hampton Roads, Virginia writes, I've been looking into some of the issues with reaching a target gravity before boiling and adding hops. Would it make any sense to boil down to reach your target pre-boil gravity and then start your boil timer? Would this have any adverse effect? Well, you can do that. You can increase the length of your boil to get a higher gravity wort if you're looking to hit a specific starting gravity. One downside, however, is that you will be darkening your wort a bit. The longer you boil, the darker it gets. And, consequently, it may affect the flavor of the beer a little bit, depending on how long you boil. I mean, some styles, you purposefully boil for a long time to get, caramel notes, and you get nice thick wort and such as that. So, if you're just adding just a few minutes to get down to your target gravity, probably not a big deal. But if you're trying to boil or trying to brew a nice, really light-colored, say, Pilsner or something like that, it may not be something that you want to do on a regular basis. All right, let's get into our interview with Patrick Bresnahan on his adventures with bourbon and beer. Well, Patrick Bresnahan, welcome to Basic Brewing Radio.
Thanks for having me, James. It's curious, but I feel as if I know you because I've listened to almost every podcast. I'm churning through the archives, and I'm right now in August of last year. And you have no idea how many walls you've painted with me, how many lawns you've mowed alongside me. So it's been quite a journey for me. So,
well, I'm flattered that you have stuck with us for so long, and you're a very patient man. And you said that you had a momentous anniversary or a momentous occasion recently?
Yesterday was my 1-year anniversary as a home brewer. So for those folks out there listening, I don't have the most experience of all your guests, but I guess I represent that point of view of people who have been at it for about a year and have finally started to get to the point where they feel like experimenting and playing around a little bit.
Well, congratulations. Happy birthday.
Thank you.
So tell us about your experiment. I mean, we've got, how did this come about?
Well, it started off with a Imperial Oak Stout ingredient kit that I had ordered from a website. And excuse me.
And we should mention that you're coming out of a cold, so we may have some congestion still happening here, but that's okay. We'll work through it.
I have a Foley artist that I employ to insert random coughs to make myself sound more human. However, I started with this Imperial Oak Stout kit, and it's an extract kit. I have not yet taken the hop to all grain because moreover, I'm actually about to move back to the big city, St. Louis, and I figured that transition would more properly happen in the new house where I have a little bit more room and a much bigger kitchen. The accident occurred, because most experiments start with an accident, when I took my gravity reading after brewing in the carboy, and I realized that my target gravity was way off. I had expected somewhere in the 1080s, possibly 1090s, and my hydrometer read 1056.
Oh, my.
And that's when I realized that I had mismeasured the amount of water that I had used.
So this wasn't a case of as sometimes happen if you do, say, a split boil with an extract batch and you mix in the water in the fermenter. Sometimes it doesn't get mixed all, as well as people think, and they take a gravity reading and say, "Oh my goodness, I'm half of where I was." This was actually an error with the amount of water being added.
It was a mathematical error. I think it was supposed to be an addition of somewhere along 2.5 or 2 gallons of boiled water, and I was off by, I believe, a half gallon to a gallon. Just an egregious error that I cannot answer for, except to say that I am not a math teacher.
That's right. But everything was spelled right on your notes. So
that's correct. Correct.
So you said, and then what was your plan of remedying the situation?
Well, like most people of the current generation, I'm 32 to give you a frame of reference. I hit Google, and I started looking around on the various homebrew message boards to look for some ideas about turning this oaked imperial stout into a bourbon oaked imperial stout. And the suggestions that I saw ranged from 4 ounces of bourbon to the whole bottle.
Oh my goodness!
And I thought, well, that's crazy talk. And so I sent an email to a fellow by the name of James Spencer. I think you know him, and he suggested that I play around. And I thought, well, fair enough.
Yeah, that's my standard answer when I have no clue. It's like, wow, that sounds like a good idea for an experiment. Why don't you do it and get back to us?
Sure. It's right up there with the homebrew shop owner. Well, depends on what you like.
Yeah.
So I thought, to give you a little bit of background, I started drinking beer probably when I was about 24, actually. I did not do the crazy 21 type of stuff. I don't know why. Was not much of a drinker when I was younger. And when I did start drinking, I actually started drinking bourbon. And it was something that I came to enjoy, and I studied and I read books upon books. I visited every distillery in Kentucky that is tourable, as well as Tennessee, and bourbon is something that I know pretty well. And so I thought, well, I'll make this a bourbon oak stout. And I also thought this would be kind of a good way to regain some of that imperial glory that I had sought for my stout by raising the ABV by adding whiskey. So I crawled under the basement bar and started pulling out bottles of bourbon. And this being my first alcoholic passion, I have quite a collection. And I started to decide, what do I want to add to this beer? And in looking through the various options I had, I pulled out a few bottles. One was Maker's Mark, the venerable wheat-based bourbon whiskey. And I pulled out, I think there was Woodford Reserve, and I also pulled out a bottle of Old Grandad.
That sounds like something from the cartoons.
Old Grandad has a specific use for me. Every year after the parent-teacher conferences, we go to the river. All of my colleagues who are of a like mind, we gather at some place along the shores of the Gasconade River, and we drink beer and we tell lies and eat fried food. And Old Grandad is just appropriate for that sort of a scenario. It is the type of whiskey that you pull the cork out of, you take a sip, and you pass it around the campfire. And That's about the only time I'd recommend it. It comes in at 114 proof,
Hmm.
and if you do a color comparison, it is about as dark a whiskey as I've ever run across. It's pretty well dark brown, almost almost like an amber beer, a dark amber beer at that.
Now, what makes a bourbon a bourbon? I know there's a specific definition. What is that?
Sure. Bourbon in the United States, it has to be brewed in the U.S. It can be brewed in any state, or distilled, I should say. It can be distilled in any state. It does not have to be Kentucky. But in order to be called bourbon, it has to be 51% corn, and it has to be aged in new American oak barrels. You can't use any used barrels, and they have to be the species of wood is on record, and I believe it has to be aged a minimum of 2 years to be called straight bourbon. It's bourbon as soon as it hits the oak, but to be straight bourbon, it has to be aged for a minimum of 2 years. Most of what you find is aged around 4 years to 3 years. Jack Daniels, Jim Beam, depending on what level and how much you spent usually. Then it can range all the way up to the ultimate holy grail of bourbons, George T. Stagg, which usually comes in somewhere above 140 proof. And it's limited to very few bottles, and you have to donate a kidney to get one for their annual release every fall.
Yeah. And you'll need that kidney.
That's right.
And you're donating a part of your liver, but just to no one in particular when you drink.
Exactly. But something like that, you would probably not best be served by adding to a beer, just because the cost of the whiskey would make it prohibitive.
Sure.
I chose to use the old Granddad over the others because with the high proof, I thought that was my best chance of raising the ABV, since my original gravity was nowhere near what I'd hoped. And also because the next bottle that I had to choose from that I had enough of to use was over $40. And I thought, for an experiment, using the good stuff is maybe not the best move. Plus, with the super dark color of the old Granddad, that would imply that it has quite a bit of wood flavor all by itself, because the new make whiskey right off the still is as clear as water.
Right.
And so the color of the whiskey is indicative of a lot of times how oaky it will taste. And so I thought that was in line with what I was hoping to add to my beer. So I added to my beer.
So the question is, how much?
Well, and that's where the playing around. I brewed the beer as normal, and I fermented it for several weeks. Let's see, according to my notes, it fermented for 3 weeks. I added at the 2-week mark, I racked it to secondary and added oak powder, which is their fancy name for sawdust. And boiled that with a little bit of water to make sure it was not going to add anything unwanted, and managed to find a way to get this oak sludge into the neck of a glass carboy. By the way, I'd use a bucket the next time I do this, just to not have to go through that again.
Makes sense.
And then when I was ready to bottle, I racked it to the bottling bucket, and I had not yet added my priming sugar, and I drew off several 2-ounce samples. And I tried adding, I believe it was half teaspoons of bourbon to these various samples until I achieved a level which I thought was appropriate. And then I did what most men would do. I think I called my wife and said, "Wife," Michelle is her name, and she supports my habit in grand style, and she is very wonderful to me. She told me that there's, I think, 6 teaspoons per ounce, I believe it was. And I won't swear to that, but anyone can Google this while they're listening to us and find out if that's true or not. But I was unable to take the amount that I'd added to those small samples of beer and scale them up for the whole batch. Well, what I did was I actually bottled 12 bombers, 22-ounce bombers, and I just bottled those as the base beer, the oak stout. And then I added to the remaining half of the batch, according to my notes, I added 2¼ ounces of bourbon, which is not much if you really think about it, and certainly less than I expected. But I did experiment with as much as 4 measures of bourbon, and that really did not taste like beer.
Yeah, at a certain point, it seems like it'd be a tipping point where you are. It's more about the bourbon than about the beer. So when you say you added that much, you added that to what volume of beer?
At that point, it was half a batch. So I would say
About 2.5 gallons, maybe, or
I'd say about 2.5 gallons, right about that, because I was able to get a total of 12 more 22-ounce bombers out of the second half of the batch. And so I did that, and I bottled 6 more bottles, which was the one that you marked at the middle grade. Then I added a 1¼ ounces to the remaining batch, what was left in the bottling bucket with priming sugar. Then I bottled the other 6 bottles to give me the bourbon stout that had 2 measures of bourbon in it. That was the one that was marked 2 on the cap for you.
Okay. And so you were kind enough to send us a bottle of the base beer with no bourbon at all in it, and then one of the beers with 1 measure of bourbon in it, and then one with the double. And so I was meeting with Steve Wilkes and Tim Hudson for the video shoot of the Basic Brewing video episode that I just posted this week. And so I said, well, while we're boiling the beer, why don't we taste some good beers from Missouri? And so we did. And here's what we came up with. Well, here we are. We're live and on location here this time. Steve Wilkes.
It's a pleasure to be back.
And do you want to introduce our special guest at whose house we are at? We are.
Say that again in English. We're here at my friend Tim Hudson's house and Charlotte Taylor. And Tim is a new brewer. We're brewing his first batch of beer today.
Amen.
Welcome, Tim, and thank you for having us over.
Happy to have you here, especially when you bring beer to the sample.
And we're teaching you how to brew. Now you bought a kit. For a homebrew kit from Andy Sparks at the homebrewery.com here in town, and you got the our DVD with it. Now, not every DVD comes with a house visit. I just want to let you know. So it's kind of a special occasion.
No doubt. Actually, the kit was a gift from my wife and boys for a Father's Day a number of years ago, and I finally figured out where I could find some uninterrupted time on a Saturday, and even better, you guys were available to come over.
And we're going to put you on video too, so we doubly appreciate your help. But what we've got here is an oaked stout, and then one with a measure of bourbon, and then one with 2 measures of bourbon. So why don't we go ahead and open the oaked stout and pour that, and then we'll have a sample just to get a baseline. So these are big beers; these are big bombers. So the video podcast could be fun later on in the day.
And we don't know what the measure is.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
You ready to pour you a little bit here?
Yeah.
Say when.
That should be good to start.
Good.
We can finish these off later, but just for a taste. These are Arkansas Razorback pint glasses here. I don't know how Patrick would feel about his beer going into Razorback glasses.
Now they're in the SEC.
It didn't help with today's basketball game, but
It's a nice stout.
Oh my!
Yeah,
you can really get the oak there.
Yeah, you do.
That's good. It's not only the oakiness, but there's some spiciness from the oak there as well. Mm-hmm. I think it's good. What do you think, Tim?
It's very tasty. I can't claim to know all the complexities you guys do, but it's nice to taste.
Yeah, it's good. It's kind of on the fruity side a little bit,
and effervescent. It's clean. It's not real cloying in your mouth, and I kind of like that.
Mm-hmm. Oh, but the oak really does come through well. Mm-hmm. It's not hitting you over the head, as some oaked beers that I've had do. They're like, just like hops. We got hops, or we got oak. It's like chewing on a table leg.
Yeah.
But this is nice. It's nicely well balanced.
So our task is to determine which. So our base beer gives us our base, and then we will determine which of the two measures of bourbon is most appropriate for this beer.
Yeah, or maybe both are. Maybe we'll taste, we'll say, oh, that one's good, and oh, that one's doubly good. It's all a matter of preference. That was good. So we'll rinse, and then we'll come back to this second one.
Yeah, lather, rinse, and repeat.
That's right.
That's my law firm.
I forgot to mention that we are brewing as we are sampling during the boil here. Tim's very first beer in his house here. It smells good. It smells like a good beer on the stove. It's a pale ale kit.
Little American pale ale.
Yeah.
We're going to hit it with some mystery hops at the end.
We got some hops, little hops in a bag. We're not sure what they are. They smell good.
They smell good. They're citrusy.
Number two.
Okay, it's number two.
Which is labeled number one.
The Colonial Oak Stout.
Isn't that a golf tournament?
Yeah, the first one is labeled the Colonist Oak Stout, and this is the Colonial Oak Stout.
What's the? Do you know the ABV on this, James? Because it's rather warming, and I'm feeling rather giddy.
Well, he says that it was supposed to be an Imperial Oak Stout, but he says it's nowhere near Imperial levels.
That's easy for you to say.
This could be trouble.
My wife can drive you home.
Yeah, well, there you go.
She's not sampling.
Of course, we got some time, so we can chill out after this.
The nose seems a little rounder on this. I haven't tasted it yet.
My nose is getting rounder over time.
Yeah, well, yeah. Also a little red, too.
Still get the oak. Are you getting much bourbon?
Just a hint of it. Really nothing real strong. But I do catch it there at the finish.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I catch it at the finish, too.
To me, it's more about oak than about the bourbon. Yeah, there is on the aftertaste. There is a little bit of the bourbon.
Yeah, I can. This is definitely a bourboned beer. I mean, but it's not overwhelming at all, and I kind of like the level of it.
Mm-hmm. It's nice. It adds a note of complexity without overpowering.
Yeah, I've had some even commercial bourbon aged beers that I couldn't drink. I mean, or just drink a little bit of. Right. Even though they were supposed to be relatively session-y. And it's just like, oh, God, what are you guys thinking?
Yeah, but this is not that.
No.
So it's good. We're saying that
we're saying it's good.
Number one was good, or the first one was good, and this is good as well.
But I'm going to say I like this better. It seems a little, again, round is the word I want to use. It just seems like it, even the head retention I think is better on it. So I don't know what that, I don't know that you can attribute that to bourbon, but I like this beer better.
Tim, do you like this one better?
Not being a bourbon person, I'd say just equal to the other one. I don't find it to be superior or lesser.
Okay.
So what would you pair this with? A bourboned beer? What's the best way to consume it? Just on its own, or do you?
Well, I mean, I think that this is good to go on its own, but also you would. I'm thinking like that Belgian beef stew that you made.
Oh yeah,
for the video podcast to be good.
Yeah, beef stew, Irish stew. I mean, steak. You know,
duck maybe.
Duck, goose. We're
not even to the third bottle yet. So. Steve's back in elementary school.
Well, we'll pause for a moment, and then we'll come back and sample the third. Now, we should say, before we get started, that you thought that as that second beer warmed, it kind of lost some of its roundedness?
I thought it did. I thought it became more roasty, more kind of typical stout-like, and then it really took on that kind of roasted barley taste. And I lost a little bit of the bourbon taste as it warmed up to me. So just my last hit, as I was finishing my little sample, I just thought the beer changed quite dramatically. I don't know if you guys thought any of that or not, but
I got more bourbon
You have
flavor
more?
at the end. So, I don't know.
what does this tell us?
I don't know. It means we don't know what we're doing.
That's what I'm thinking.
Well, this is colonial beer, and we're men of the 21st century. So
That's right.
We're Americans, darn it.
So now we're drinking
The double bourbon.
the double
double shot.
Okay.
And what is a measure of bourbon? What does that mean in his brewing process here?
That's what we don't know at this particular time.
Okay.
We'll find out in the interview that's going to be donutted around this sampling session here.
And I'm doing an aggressive pour.
As you were known to do.
Yeah, I'm
Well,
sorry, I
but that's what you're supposed to. Actually, in Randy Mosher's book, he advocates the aggressive
Pour straight down the middle.
pour straight down the middle and let it settle out. And I agree with him.
I'm just not a patient man. Oh, by the way, we haven't done the cheers.
Oh, cheers.
Cheers all the way around. So this is the Traders, Trader, Trader, not
Right.
Traitor.
Right. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. There's some bourbon in there.
Hello.
It's familiar.
My, that's a lot more rich.
Yes.
I like it better just off this first taste.
So you're not a bourbon man, but you like this better.
Apparently, we'll see.
So the second one may have been straddling the fence a little bit, maybe.
Yeah. That's my scientific word. First of all, I want to say all three of these beers are nice. Mm-hmm. But the pour is different. My pour was very aggressive. I mean, I really poured it straight down the middle, let it splash around. They've all got a big, creamy, thick head on. And by the way, the head retention on these are wonderful. Mm-hmm. So I like all three of these beers very well. I will go out on a fence right now and say the last one with the double measure is by far my favorite.
I'm inclined to agree. And maybe because I had a wimpy pour on the other two, which I poured myself. So
Well, we still have more in these big old bomber bottles. So this is to me I was expecting more bourbon to mean that it was more harsh.
Yeah.
A higher alcohol kind of, but this to me is more kind of rich tasting.
It's more rich. It's almost approaching kind of milk stout mouthfeel, and the richness of it is really coming through. I think just those bourbon notes, that kind of sweet grain, sweetness from a good bourbon, is coming through here. And I don't know what kind of bourbon he used, but it's.
I think it softens the oakiness a little bit too. The oak's not as immediately apparent.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you're right. So our vote would be for the double measure.
Yeah, that'd be my vote, and I don't know if a triple measure would be better or worse. I mean, I think you do reach a point of diminishing returns,
Right.
But this to me is very pleasant, and I would enjoy drinking this at some length.
Well, we've got more. So awesome. This was tasty, and I guess we all thank Patrick for the samples.
We do indeed.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Bresnahan. Appreciate it very much.
So what did you think, Patrick? I mean, it seemed like to us that there were some interesting things going on there. I mean, it seemed like to us that the beer with the more bourbon was more sort of rounded than the other two. And I don't think it was just because of aggressive pouring from Steve, because we poured some more after that. And, it was the same effect. So that was surprising to us. Is that what you perceived as well?
Yes, I would say that the regular oak stout was it had a high roasty malted character to it. It was fairly sweet, and I thought the oak really kind of dominated it. I guess that's to be expected when you dump sawdust into a fermenter. That it's going to taste and I'm also curious. I may try this sourcing my own sawdust. I have a small hobby of making furniture, and I have more sawdust collected in garbage bags in my basement than you would believe. And so at some point, I think I can make a small business selling sawdust to anyone who wants to try this.
Gourmet sawdust.
That's right. That's right. Genuine Missouri oak.
So so you heard our tasting notes. Were your perceptions and those that you've shared the beers with were those perceptions universal?
I would say so. The number 2 is consistently ranked higher in most people's estimates than the others. Mick and I are sitting here now drinking the double measure bourbon, and he hasn't yet given me his thoughts on it. He's not the biggest stout drinker in the world, but he will guinea pig anything for me. And what do you think, Mick?
Very good. And I would say, compared to the other two, probably the smoothest. A little less grainy, a little smoother, a little less chocolatey. Very pleasant.
Now, who is Mick? We haven't introduced him to the recording audience yet.
Mick Bird is a retired history teacher from good old Mary's R1 Vienna High School, where I currently teach, and he has always been my number 1 guinea pig for any of my beer experiments over this last year.
Well, there you go. I mean, it sounds like again, I think it's counterintuitive to me. Especially with something called Old Granddad that that you swig around the campfire, it's counterintuitive to me that adding more of something like that, it seems like you'd get more heat, and more kind of in your face strength instead of mellowing out the beer.
Well, I think the reason for that is. My final gravity after fermentation was complete was 1.025. And so there was quite a bit of residual sweetness, which I like to think would balance out with the overall spicier character of the higher proof whiskey.
Now hearing that final gravity, what did you say your original gravity was?
The original was 1056.
Okay, and did you do a split boil, or was it all boiled in the same kettle?
It was a split boil, but I do take I have a bit of a paranoid streak in me, and I usually take good care to make sure everything's well mixed before I take any measurements, because I try and strive for accuracy if at all possible.
Okay, all right.
I'm one of those people who takes his hydrometer and calibrates it. At room temperature, distilled water before every batch I brew, and I'm sure there's some listeners out there who go through the same pains because they have the same, we'll call it psychological issues that I do with accuracy.
So if you were to do this experiment again, or are you going to do another experiment with bourbon, or do you think that this kind of satisfies? Has this given you satisfactory results in your mind?
If that's very kind of you. When I redo this experiment, I have to. I think I'm going to change a couple of things, or try some new things. I think I'm going to try a 3-measure bourbon just to see if, given a little bit of time to age, if it'll smooth out. And obviously, at some point, I will hit the law of diminishing returns, and it will not be an improvement to add more bourbon. But I also want to try some different bourbons. I'm sure using a regular bourbon at a more pedestrian 40 proof or so would probably be a good idea. And then also I think that I would maybe possibly try around using maybe just a little bit different recipe, maybe different hops, any one of the myriad levers you can pull as a home brewer in order to tweak your recipe.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like there are a lot of variables out there to be examined. It seems like you've got a good baseline to start from.
Sure.
And I hope that this conversation gives some guidance to those out there who may be wanting to experiment with their own. And
sure.
You don't necessarily have to buy the best bourbon on the shelf to make a good bourbon stout.
Absolutely. And I hope this helps anyone who's thinking of taking that plunge and has been to some of those same message boards and has seen the sheer variety of responses to how much to add. Whichever one I read that said add the whole bottle of bourbon, I can't imagine that adding a fifth of bourbon to a 5-gallon batch of beer would do anything other than produce something that was borderline undrinkable, I would think. Obviously, there are people out there who use Utopias as their daily brew, and having high proof beer is just standard move for them. But I don't think I could do that.
And I'm sure that we'll hear from others out there who have done similar things, and maybe we'll hear from the one who did the whole fifth of bourbon in a 5-gallon batch.
Provided he lives.
Yeah, that's true. Depending on how dilute it is, a pint may give you quite the dose there.
Yeah. I obviously you can always add more bourbon if you're not satisfied with the way it tastes. So starting small and working your way up would probably be a better plan. I would say anyone who's looking to brew a 5-gallon batch, I would say 5, maybe 6 ounces of 80 proof bourbon would probably be about a good starting point.
And there's nothing that says that you can't spike your pint of beer with a little bit of bourbon, at serving time.
Absolutely. And, you could do that sort of like the Berliner Weiss where they add the flavoring when they serve it. Mm-hmm. You could just add the bourbon to taste and see what you really like.
There you go. Well, Patrick, I really appreciate your sending the beers, and I hope that you'll keep us posted on your further experiments.
Okay, well, I'm glad you enjoyed them, James, and thanks for having me on the show.
Well, thanks again to Patrick and Mick up there in the background, up there in Missouri. And thanks to Steve and Tim down here in Arkansas for helping to evaluate the beers as well. Now, that's a fun experiment, and I hope to hear more from Patrick. And if you have any experience with bourbon and beers, let me know. You can find me same place if you want to ask brewing questions or show suggestions or whatever. You can write to james@basicbrewing.com or just fill out the contact form on basicbrewing.com. And please don't forget to tell us where you're from. Be sure to check out our DVDs while you're on the site. Extract Brewing and Partial Mashing, Stepping into All Grain, Low-Tech Lagering and Decoction Mashing, and Introduction to Wine Kits. You can find them all on our site, along with our Brewer's Logbook, which is now available to order. We've got combo deals to save you a few bucks if you want to buy more than one DVD at a time. And you can check out our Basic Brewing shirts in the store, too. You can see a listing of the fine folks across the country who sell our DVDs on basicbrewing.com. And if there isn't a vendor in your area, you can order them online in our online shop at basicbrewingshop.com. Thanks to everyone who's continued to click on our Amazon.com associate link. We appreciate the support. Our featured products this week that were purchased through the link are Antarctic Antics, a book of penguin poems, and Mahogany 5-string banjo neck, unfinished. Thanks again, everybody. Remember, I can't tell who bought what, so no worries there. Just click on the Amazon.com logo on our site the next time you feel like Amazon shopping, and we appreciate your support greatly. Don't forget, you can also join the American Homebrewers Association or subscribe to Brew Your Own magazine through the associate links on basicbrewing.com. That's all until next week. Until then, thanks for listening. I'm James Spencer. Production help for Basic Brewing Radio and our website is provided by Kelly Dodson. Basic Brewing Radio is a production of Active Voicing. We'll talk to you next time, everybody. So long.